This is my true story. I worked my whole life to build something solid for my family. My son had every comfort, every chance I never had. I thought raising him with love would make him wise, but I was wrong. One morning, I learned that the boy I fed and clothed had stolen my credit card. He didn't even hide it, he bragged about it. That day, something in me changed. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I made a plan. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It started as a normal morning. Sunlight through the kitchen window, coffee brewing, the quiet hum of a house that had seen decades of work and sacrifice. My son dropped by, smiling like everything was fine. He asked if he could borrow my wallet for a minute to grab something from the store. I didn't think twice. He'd done it before. He was my son. Trusting him was automatic. I handed it to him without a thought. He laughed, said he'd be right back, and walked out the door. That laugh stuck in my head. The easy, careless kind that comes from someone who's never had to earn what they take. An hour passed, then 2. He didn't come back. I called his phone. No answer. I wasn't worried yet, but something didn't feel right. Out of habit, I checked my phone notifications, the ones from the bank I rarely opened. The first alert made my stomach twist. There was a charge for $3,500 at an electronics store, then another, $7,200 at a luxury watch retailer, then one more, $1,800 for hotel reservations under his name. I scrolled further and saw the total climbing with every refresh. My hands went cold. He was using my card like it was his own. I froze for a minute, staring at the screen. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that someone else had stolen my card, that maybe he'd lost it and someone was using it. But then I saw the name on one of the receipts that came through my email. His. My son's full name, printed clearly on the invoice. There was no mistake. He had done this, and he didn't even care enough to hide it. When he finally came home that evening, he was laughing on the phone with someone, bragging about how he'd finally treated himself. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask for explanations. I just watched him walk past me, smelling like new cologne and arrogance. He looked at me like I was invisible. That's when I realized something. He didn't see me as his father anymore. He saw me as a resource, a card to swipe when life got expensive. That's what hurt the most. Not the money, but the disrespect behind it. That night, I sat alone in the living room and looked at the credit card statements again. He had spent nearly $30,000 in less than 24 hours. Flights, hotels, restaurants, designer items. I imagined him laughing with friends, saying, "Don't worry, it's my dad's card." That thought burned like fire in my chest. I had given him everything, a good home, an education, a car when he turned 18. I had bailed him out of trouble more than once. And this was how he repaid me. By stealing. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, going over every choice I'd made as a parent. Maybe I'd made things too easy. Maybe I'd confused love with comfort. I'd wanted him to have what I didn't, but all I did was teach him how to take without giving back. When the morning came, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about theft. This was about character. My son had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. I called the bank first thing. They confirmed the charges and offered to freeze the account. I said no. I told them to leave it open. I wanted him to keep spending, to dig the hole deeper. Because every charge he made was proof. Evidence that would later become my weapon. Sometimes when someone betrays you, the best move isn't to react fast. It's to stay still long enough for them to show their full hand. By evening, I had printed every transaction, every statement, every time-stamped charge. I placed them neatly in a folder. Each page felt like a piece of truth, solid and undeniable. My hands didn't shake. My anger was gone. All that was left was focus. He thought this was a small mistake, one he could laugh off or blame on borrowing. He had no idea he'd just written his own downfall. That night, I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the quiet. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man sharpening a blade that had been gathering dust for years. He had stolen my card. Now, I would take back something far greater. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was still and quiet, just the sound of the clock ticking in the hallway. My son was still asleep upstairs, probably dreaming about his new toys, the expensive watch, the sneakers, the dinners paid for with my hard work. I didn't go up there. I didn't even want to see his face yet. I made my coffee, sat down at the table, and opened my folder of printed statements again. Every line of those transactions felt like a scar, numbers telling the story of a father's trust turned into a son's greed. But instead of anger, what I felt now was calm. Cold, clear calm. I'd learned long ago that shouting doesn't fix betrayal. Words don't reach people who see kindness as weakness. Action does. Quiet, deliberate action. That was what I had planned. I turned on my laptop and opened the files I'd saved over the years. Old business records, property documents, stock accounts, and trust papers. My son had always thought I'd retired with barely enough to live comfortably. He had no idea how deep my assets really went, or how many of his ventures were still tied to my name. When he was younger, he begged me to help him start his business. I'd agreed, but made sure every share certificate and initial investment was legally documented. On paper, I still owned controlling interest in his company, 51% to be exact. At the time, I'd done it to protect him from reckless partners. Now, it would protect me from him. I opened the legal files, scanned the pages, and smiled for the first time in days. Everything was still in place. Every contract was still valid. He might have stolen my credit card, but he'd forgotten who taught him how business works. I had built my life on structure, on understanding where power actually lies, not in noise, not in pride, but in ownership. He thought he had taken something from me. In truth, he had no idea how much of his life was still under my control. After breakfast, I drove to the bank, not the one tied to the stolen card, but the one that held my business accounts. The manager had known me for years. I asked to review every corporate account, every shareholding, and every linked entity. Within an hour, I had full visibility again. My son's name appeared on several accounts, but only as an authorized user, not an owner. That was his first mistake. I was the founder, the guarantor, the original signature. Legally, everything that bore my name was mine to reclaim. I left the bank with a stack of fresh paperwork and went straight to my lawyer's office. He was the same man who'd handled my business for decades. He didn't ask many questions. He knew my expression said enough. I told him I wanted full control restored over all active accounts and ownerships tied to my name. He nodded and began drafting the requests. There was no emotion in his tone, just efficiency. That's how I liked it. Emotion clouds judgment. Paperwork never lies. By midday, the plan was already in motion. Legal notices were being prepared, ownership transfers queued, and asset freezes initiated. Everything that once flowed through his hands was now being redirected back to mine, quietly, legally, perfectly. My lawyer said it would take about 24 hours for the changes to fully take effect. That was fine. I had waited my whole life to teach him responsibility. I could wait one more day to teach him consequence. When I got home that evening, he was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, laughing again. Same careless grin, same empty confidence. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "Hey, Dad," he said casually, like nothing had happened. I nodded, said nothing, and walked past him. I didn't need to explain myself. The process was already happening behind the scenes. He just didn't know it yet. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The anger was gone. The sadness, too. All that remained was certainty. That calm feeling that comes when you've made a decision you won't regret. I had given him enough warnings over the years. I had forgiven his mistakes, covered his debts, guided his steps. But now, the time for teaching was over. This time, he would learn not from words, but from loss. By morning, the storm would start, and he would finally understand that stealing from me wasn't just theft, it was a declaration of war. And I had just responded. The next day, the sun rose like any other, but the house didn't feel the same. Something inside it had shifted, not in sound or sight, but in meaning. Every chair, every photo, Every memory carried the weight of disappointment. My son came downstairs late, still wearing the clothes from the night before, scrolling through his phone and smiling like a man with no worries. He poured himself coffee, used my mug, and didn't even glance at me. That used to bother me once, how casual he was, how little respect he showed. But now, watching him like that, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt clarity. I was seeing the real him, not the version I had built in my head. He sat at the table bragging on the phone about some big deal he'd just closed. He said he was celebrating tonight, probably with my stolen money. He laughed loud and careless, completely unaware that his so-called success was about to crumble before the day ended. I looked at him across the room, thinking about the years I'd spent raising him, teaching him to be honest, humble, disciplined. I remembered fixing his bike when he was 10, helping him study when he failed math, covering his college loans so he could start fresh. Every moment of pride I'd ever felt now turned bitter in my memory. He had learned nothing. Every lesson, every sacrifice, every late-night worry meant nothing. He didn't see me as a father anymore. I was a tool, a card, a wallet, a resource to tap into whenever he wanted something. After he left the house, I sat down at the table and stared at the empty coffee cup he'd used. It sounds small, but that cup symbolized everything. My generosity, my trust, my quiet care. And now, like everything else, he'd dirtied it without a second thought. I cleaned it slowly, placed it back on the shelf, and stood there for a while. That's when I realized this wasn't about the money at all. It was about respect. It was about a lifetime of being taken for granted by the very person I would have died to protect. I walked into my study and opened the drawer where I kept old family photos. There was one of him at age 5, smiling wide with his first bicycle, holding the handlebar with both hands while I stood behind him. I stared at that picture for a long time. That little boy was gone. In his place stood a grown man with greed in his eyes and pride in his chest. Somewhere along the way, I had failed to teach him humility. I had built a life so easy for him that he thought struggle was beneath him. The more I thought, the heavier it felt, not anger, but a deep, quiet sadness. I wasn't grieving money. I was grieving the man I thought my son would become. The betrayal wasn't just theft. It was proof that my love had been one-sided. I'd given, and he'd only taken. For years I'd excused his behavior, the small lies, the missed calls, the arrogance. I told myself he'd grow out of it. He never did. And now I had to accept what every father dreads, that sometimes the son you raise with love grows into the kind of man you never wanted him to be. But as that sadness sat in me, something else began to rise. Resolve. Because grief without action becomes weakness. And I had spent too many years being silent. Not this time. If he thought I would let this go, he was wrong. He had taken from me without shame. Now I would take back everything without mercy. But I would do it clean. No shouting, no threats, no revenge fueled by emotion. Just paperwork, precision, and truth. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street, watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, my son was laughing, drinking, spending what wasn't his. He thought he'd won. He thought he was untouchable. I whispered to myself, not out of hate, but out of resolve. Tomorrow, you learn what trust costs. When the clock hit midnight, I sent one email to my lawyer confirming the final transfers and approvals. It was done. Everything was moving into motion. My son's world would begin to shrink the next morning, piece by piece, account by account, just as quietly as he had stolen from mine. The weight in my chest didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt solid, like the calm that comes before a storm you've prepared for your whole life. He had made me the fool once. Tomorrow, he would learn that even fools keep records. The next morning, I woke up with a clear purpose. I wasn't driven by rage anymore. That had passed. What replaced it was focus. The kind of cold, methodical focus that builds empires and ends them just as easily. My son thought he was smarter than me, that the old man who'd raised him was too slow, too trusting, too soft. What he didn't understand was that I'd spent 40 years navigating contracts, banks, and business partners twice as ruthless as he'd ever be. He had youth, arrogance, and impulse. I had experience, patience, and documentation. In life, those three things are enough to destroy anyone who underestimates you. At 9 a.m., I arrived at my lawyer's office. He greeted me like he always did, polite, professional, curious. I laid out the folder on his desk. It contained everything: ownership documents, proof of my majority shares, digital access to the accounts tied to my son's company, and every authorization still bearing my signature. He flipped through them slowly, eyes widening slightly with each page. "You still have full rights here," he said, more like an observation than a question. I nodded. "Good," I said quietly. "Then it's time we use them." He began the process immediately, drafting the notices, sending digital authorizations, and filing legal control claims through the business registry. Every step was silent, precise, and completely within the law. There was no hacking, no trickery, just legal ownership moving back to where it belonged. My lawyer told me it would take 24 to 48 hours for everything to finalize. That was fine by me. I didn't need speed, I needed accuracy. By the end of the day, every account, every major holding, every access point connected to my name would shift. I left the office and went straight to the bank. The manager there had known me since my company's early days. When I explained the situation, calmly, without emotion, he didn't ask questions. He just followed the paper trail. Together, we verified every line of authorization, every account tied to my credentials. I instructed him to initiate an asset redirection, meaning that all company funds, reserves, and liquid investments would be moved into a secure parent account under my exclusive authority. Not his, mine. The process took most of the morning, but I stayed through it, sipping coffee and signing papers one by one. It felt almost surgical, like removing a tumor without anesthesia. By the time we were done, more than $2 million in total assets had been relocated to the primary trust account. My son wouldn't even notice it at first. That was the beauty of doing things properly. There would be no alerts, no warnings, no alarms, just silence, until he tried to move money that no longer existed for him. By noon, everything was done. My lawyer confirmed the transfers were complete, the new authorizations filed, and the registry updated. My son's company, the business he had bragged about building, was no longer his. On paper, it was mine again, the way it had been before I'd handed it to him out of love. It's strange how easy it was to take back what I'd given freely. Love had made me sign those papers once. Betrayal had made me sign them again. This time for good. When I drove home that afternoon, the sky was bright and empty. I remember thinking how calm everything looked. The city went on as usual. People walking, buses moving, horns echoing. No one knew that. In a few hours, one man's entire life was going to collapse. That's the thing about justice. It doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it walks quietly, wearing a suit, carrying documents instead of weapons. At home, I made tea and waited. I checked my emails once more. Everything was complete. The lawyer's confirmation came through with one final line: "All accounts under your authority. Process closed." I read that sentence twice. It didn't bring happiness. It brought balance. That night, I sat on the porch, looking at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. I wasn't proud. I wasn't regretful either. I just understood that fairness doesn't always come through forgiveness. Sometimes it comes through reclaiming what's yours with the same silence they used to take it. By the time I went to bed, I knew my son's phone would start buzzing by morning. Banks, creditors, partners, all asking questions he couldn't answer. And when he came looking for me, he wouldn't find anger waiting for him. He'd find consequence. The morning after the transfers, I woke early and sat at the table with my coffee, waiting. The air in the house was still, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Quiet, slow, inevitable. Around 8 a.m., I heard his car pull into the driveway. He always parked fast, slammed the door too hard, and walked with that same impatient confidence that comes from never being told no. He entered the house humming, tossing his keys onto the counter, phone in hand. He didn't notice me sitting there. He was too busy scrolling through his messages, grinning. For a brief moment, he looked untouchable. I watched him, thinking, "You have no idea what's coming." He poured himself a glass of orange juice, still half smiling. Then, as he looked at his phone again, I saw the change. His expression froze. His brow furrowed. His lips tightened slightly. The first notification must have come through. Maybe it was the failed transaction, maybe the declined payment, or maybe the alert about the frozen account. He blinked twice, tapped the screen, and frowned harder. Then came the second message, and the third. Each one seemed to chip away at his arrogance like cracks spreading across glass. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. He dialed someone quickly, his assistant maybe, pacing the floor. I couldn't hear what was said, but I didn't need to. His tone changed from confidence to confusion, from confusion to panic. He checked another app, tried transferring money, and then slammed the phone on the counter when it failed. "It's the bank," he said, more to himself than to me. "They must be having issues." I stayed quiet. He looked up then, finally noticing me sitting there, calm, coffee cup in hand. "Dad, have you heard about this?" he asked, voice tight with forced calm. I nodded slowly but didn't answer. I wanted him to feel the silence. Silence makes people tell on themselves. He kept talking, trying to fill it. "Some kind of glitch," he said. "My cards aren't working, and my partners are calling me like I did something wrong." It's crazy, I just watched him. No reaction. He went back to his phone, calling the bank this time. I could hear fragments of his voice rising. "What do you mean, access restricted?" "I'm the authorized user." "No, that's impossible. Those are my funds." He paced back and forth, breathing hard, disbelief turning into fear. After a few minutes, he hung up and threw the phone on the couch. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Someone's made a mistake. I'm going to fix this today." He grabbed his jacket, stormed toward the door, and then stopped when he saw my face. Calm, unbothered, unreadable. For a split second, I think he knew. The kind of instinct that comes not from logic, but from blood. He looked at me like a man realizing a fire had started in his own house. "Dad," he said slowly, trying to read my expression. But I gave him nothing. I didn't need to. As he stood there, frustrated and tense, I poured myself another cup of tea. Every movement was deliberate, slow, and peaceful. He looked like a storm. I looked like the eye of it. "You're quiet," he said finally, almost defensive. I nodded. "I've learned it helps," I said calmly. He frowned, trying to make sense of that. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message. He looked down, read it, and I saw the exact moment he broke. His bank had just confirmed the freeze. His business partner had pulled out. The card was deactivated. The accounts under my authority were no longer his to touch. His color drained. He sat down hard in the chair across from me, speechless for the first time in his life. "What's going on?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I just met his eyes, steady, firm, and tired. The kind of look that says, "You did this." I didn't owe him explanations. He had written his own downfall one swipe at a time. The room went quiet, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. He sat there frozen, trying to piece together how his world had fallen apart overnight. I finished my tea, stood up, and gently pushed the chair back. I placed my empty cup in the sink and looked at him one last time. "You'll figure it out," I said quietly, and walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear him breathing hard, not crying, not shouting, just breaking in silence. The same silence I had carried the night he stole from me. It was only fair he feel it now. By the next day, the news had spread across his world, quietly but completely. His business accounts were locked, his personal credit cards were suspended, and every partner he once bragged to now wanted answers. He spent the morning pacing, calling banks, messaging lawyers, blaming everyone but himself. I didn't say a word. I sat on the porch like any other morning, sipping my coffee, pretending not to hear the chaos unfolding inside the house. Every few minutes I could hear his voice, sharp, desperate, losing its edge. He was shouting about unauthorized reversals, frozen transfers, and restricted access. But it was all legal. Every move I had made was protected by signatures, dates, and documents. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. By noon, he came outside. His face looked different, pale, tight around the eyes. He was holding his phone, his hand trembling. "Dad, they're saying the accounts are empty," he said, voice small now. "The company account, the trust fund, everything." I looked up at him, calm as ever, and nodded. "Yes," I said quietly. That was all. He blinked, confused, expecting denial or surprise, but I didn't give him either. I could see it in his eyes, the gears turning, the truth slowly clicking into place. He sat down on the step beside me, head in his hands. "I don't understand," he muttered. "How could this happen?" I didn't answer. He had never understood how anything happened because I had always handled everything for him. The paperwork, the taxes, the deals. I had done it all while he enjoyed the rewards. Now that same blind trust had become his undoing. He had forgotten that every business, every company, every account still had one name above his: mine. What he didn't know was that 2 days earlier, I had quietly transferred every cent under my legal ownership into a consolidated account. One he couldn't access, one he didn't even know existed. Every vehicle, every property, every stock certificate had been rerouted through the proper channels. The process had been clean, flawless, and irreversible. His cards didn't bounce because of a glitch. They bounced because they no longer belonged to him. $2 million gone from his reach, sitting safely where it should have been all along. I didn't take the money out of greed. I took it because I'd earned it. I built those assets with my bare hands, from a time when hard work meant something. I'd given him a share out of love, not obligation. He repaid that with theft and arrogance. The difference between us was simple. He took what wasn't his. I reclaimed what always was. The law was on my side, the documents were airtight, and there was nothing he could do about it. The calls started coming in for him all afternoon. Creditors, investors, suppliers. One by one, they distanced themselves. His voice, once so loud in every room, grew smaller with each conversation. He tried to explain, tried to shift blame, but people who live off borrowed money have short memories. Without funds, he was just another name on a failed venture list. The same people who toasted him at dinners were now avoiding his calls. That's the price of arrogance. It buys friends who disappear when the bill comes due. By evening, he sat quietly on the porch beside me again, shoulders slumped, phone silent. He didn't speak for a long time. I let the quiet hang. It was a silence he needed to sit in. The silence that follows consequence. Finally, he asked softly, "Did you do this?" I didn't look at him when I answered. I did what needed to be done. No anger, no emotion, just truth. He nodded slowly, as if something inside him finally gave way. "So that's it?" he said. I finished my tea and stood up. "That's balance," I replied. Then I walked back inside, leaving him there to sit with the wreckage of what he'd built on borrowed trust. That night, I checked my accounts. Everything was where it belonged. Organized, stable, secure. It wasn't victory I felt. It was justice. Clean, final, and quiet. My son had stolen a card and thought it was a game. I had taken back $2 million and taught him the rule he should have learned years ago. When you steal from the man who built the ladder, don't be surprised when he pulls it away. The next morning, I found him gone. His car missing, his phone left behind. I didn't chase him. He needed distance, and I needed peace. What happens next in his life will depend on whether he learns from the fall. But either way, he'll never forget the day he woke up rich and went to bed ruined. It took 3 days before I heard from him again. I knew he wouldn't stay silent for long. When people lose everything, pride is always the last thing to die. The first 2 days were filled with noise from his world, partners calling me, lawyers confirming ownership, banks finalizing the freeze. But by the 3rd day, everything went quiet. That's when I knew the panic had turned into desperation. Around sunset, There was a knock on the door. Weak, hesitant, not the confident pounding I was used to. When I opened it, my son stood there, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes sunken. The same boy who once strutted around like a king now looked like someone who'd been awake for days. He didn't speak right away. He just stared at me, waiting for me to break the silence. Finally, he said it. "Dad, please." 2 words I hadn't heard from him in years. He stepped inside without waiting for me to invite him. His hands were shaking as he rubbed the back of his neck, pacing in small circles like a man trying to find words that could fix the unfixable. I said nothing. I just pointed to the chair at the table. He sat down slowly, like a child caught stealing for the first time. The air between us was heavy. You could almost hear the sound of regret breathing. He started talking fast, words spilling out without order. "It got out of control," he said. "The business was growing faster than I could manage. I thought I could pay it back. I didn't mean to." He stopped himself, realizing how empty that sounded. His voice cracked. "You have to help me. They're cutting me out. My accounts are gone. My car was repossessed this morning." His eyes darted between my face and the table, searching for sympathy. He wouldn't find it there. I let him keep talking. Sometimes silence does more than shouting ever could. It forces truth to surface. He told me he was staying at a friend's house but would be kicked out soon. He said people were talking, that investors were demanding refunds. He was embarrassed, scared, angry at everyone except himself. Every excuse sounded smaller than the last. When he finally ran out of words, I leaned back and looked at him, really looked at him. His face was pale, his pride gone. I didn't see my son the businessman anymore. I saw my son the boy, lost and hollowed by consequence. I didn't speak for a long while. Then I asked one question. "Do you know why this happened?" He nodded weakly. "Because I stole from you," he whispered. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "Because you never learned what things cost. You thought money came from comfort. You never understood that every dollar has a story." His eyes dropped to the floor. He didn't argue. He couldn't. He asked again if I could help him. "Just for now," he said. "Until I get back on my feet." He promised he'd change. He swore he'd make it right. I listened to every word, and for a second, I almost felt that old instinct, the father's reflex to protect. But then I remembered every night I'd stayed awake worrying, every moment of disrespect, every lie disguised as just a mistake. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured him a cup of water. "Drink," I said. He took it with shaking hands. That was the only thing I gave him that night. Not money, not forgiveness, just water and a seat to sit in while he faced the truth. When he finished, he put the cup down and looked at me again, tears forming. "So that's it?" he said quietly. "That's it," I replied. He didn't shout. He didn't beg anymore. He just sat there, silent, broken. After a few minutes, he stood up, straightened his wrinkled shirt, and walked to the door. At the doorway, he turned back, his voice low. "I never thought you'd do this to me." I met his eyes and said, "I never thought you'd make me." He left without another word. The sound of the door closing echoed longer than it should have. I sat there alone, staring at the empty chair he'd sat in, and realized something. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry. I was free. He had finally learned that trust isn't something you steal and spend. It's something you earn and protect. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back with an apology. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Because for the first time, my silence wasn't a wound. It was a boundary. The collapse didn't happen overnight, but when it began, it was unstoppable. I watched it from a distance, calm, steady, unshaken, while my son's world folded in on itself piece by piece. The first cracks appeared in his business. Clients stopped calling, partners started pulling out, and creditors began to demand what they were owed. The same people who once called him genius, who raised glasses in his honor at dinners, now avoided his messages and ignored his calls. It was predictable. People like that only stay close when the money flows. When it stops, loyalty disappears faster than the smoke from a burned match. His company bank account, which once held over $1 million in reserves, was empty. The lawyers had completed the asset reversals perfectly. Every transfer legitimate, every form signed, every action backed by law. The funds were back where they belonged, and he was left with the shell of a business he never actually built. When he went to the bank to demand answers, they handed him copies of ownership documents, my name printed clearly at the top. That was the first time reality hit him. Not through emotion, but through paperwork. The same papers I'd once signed in love were now the proof of his downfall. Within a week, his employees started leaving. His office, once filled with energy and noise, turned quiet. I heard from an old colleague that his accountant had quit too, unable to deal with the chaos. Soon after, his business partner filed a civil suit against him for mismanagement and breach of trust. It was over before it started. My son had built his empire on my foundation, and once I removed it, the structure collapsed with nothing to hold it up. I didn't take pleasure in watching it happen. There's no joy in watching your own child drown in consequences. But I didn't stop it either. He needed to face the cost of his choices. Every father tries to teach his son lessons while he's young. I tried too. But some sons don't learn from advice. They only learn from loss. He tried to call me several times. I didn't answer. What was there left to say? Every word would just be an excuse. I let silence do the work. Silence teaches harder than shouting ever could. Eventually, he stopped calling. But the news kept reaching me. The luxury apartment, gone. The car, repossessed. The travel club membership, canceled. Piece by piece, the life he had built on arrogance turned to dust. A few weeks later, I received a legal notice. He was trying to sue me, claiming unfair interference. I met with my lawyer once, and we both laughed at how weak the case was. The documentation was bulletproof. The company shares, the accounts, the authorizations, all were mine. He had nothing. The court dismissed his claim in the first hearing. The judge told him plainly that it wasn't fraud, it was correction. My son left the courtroom red-faced, head down, and wordless. I saw him walk past me without a glance. That image stayed with me. The man who had once strutted through life now shrinking under his own mistakes. After that, everything went quiet. No more lawsuits, no more calls. Just silence. I heard he moved into a small rented apartment across town. A friend mentioned he was trying to rebuild. Smaller clients, smaller deals. Maybe he'd finally learned that easy money never lasts. Maybe not. It wasn't my concern anymore. I'd spent decades saving him, protecting him, shielding him from every consequence. This time, I let life finish the lesson I started. I went back to my routine. Mornings on the porch, evening walks, a few quiet conversations with old friends who didn't ask questions. Peace doesn't need explanations. I didn't brag about what happened. I didn't share the story with anyone. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. Simple, calm, silent justice. Every now and then, when I see a father with his grown son laughing together, a small ache stirs inside me. Not because I miss my son, but because I miss what I thought we had. There's a difference between losing someone and realizing you never truly had them. That's what hurts the most. Still, I don't regret what I did. I gave him everything: a home, education, opportunity. He took advantage of it. So I gave him something better: consequence. That's the only inheritance that can't be stolen. And maybe, one day, when the noise of pride dies down inside him, he'll remember that. Until then, I stay quiet. Not out of hate, but out of peace. Because some lessons are worth teaching only once. After everything ended, the house finally became quiet again. Not the tense, uneasy silence of betrayal, but the kind of silence that feels earned. The kind that comes when the storm has passed, and what's left standing is what was always meant to survive. I started waking up earlier just to enjoy it. The mornings felt lighter. I'd make my coffee, sit by the window, and watch the sun spill across the porch. For the first time in years, there was no shouting, no noise, no footsteps pacing the hallway demanding money or attention. Just stillness. Just peace. At first, that peace felt strange. I'd lived too long surrounded by chaos, arguments, excuses, endless disappointments. When it stopped, it almost felt unnatural, like my mind kept waiting for the next problem to appear. But none came. The lawyers were done, the accounts were closed, the paperwork filed. Everything was settled, the chapter was over. And slowly, that strange stillness started to feel like comfort. I wasn't lonely. I was free. I went back to the things I'd forgotten. Small things that used to make me happy before money and family turned life into a battlefield. Gardening, repairing old furniture, reading newspapers on the porch. I started talking again to old friends I hadn't seen in years, people who remembered me for who I was before I became just his father. They asked about my son sometimes, but I always gave the same answer. He's learning. And that was the truth. He was learning, the hard way, that comfort without gratitude leads to downfall. One Sunday afternoon, I visited the old workshop behind the house. It was dusty, untouched for years. I opened the door and saw the workbench where I'd built my first cabinets decades ago, the same ones that paid for his college tuition. My tools were still there, lined up neatly, like old friends waiting to be picked up again. I ran my fingers over the handles, feeling the marks of age and use. That moment reminded me of something I'd lost: pride in honest work. It's funny how money can make a man forget where real satisfaction comes from. But standing there, surrounded by the smell of wood and oil, I felt grounded again. As the weeks passed, I stopped checking my phone for messages that would never come. The ache of disappointment had dulled. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was acceptance. Sometimes I'd wonder what he was doing, whether he'd found a job, whether he still blamed me, or had finally realized I wasn't his enemy. But I never called. Not because I didn't care, but because caring too much was what led us here in the first place. Love without boundaries becomes a weakness, and I'd spent too many years being weak for the sake of peace. Then one morning, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. The handwriting was his. It was short. He wrote that he was working again, that life was harder now but simpler, and that he finally understood what I meant about respect. There was no apology, not in words at least. But I could read it between the lines. He said he was doing better, that he wanted to see me one day when the time felt right. I folded the letter, put it in the drawer next to my watch, and smiled. That was enough. I didn't need him to beg anymore. I just needed to know the lesson had reached him. In the evenings, I'd sit outside, watching the sunset fade over the garden I'd planted myself. The air always smelled faintly of grass and rain. I'd think about how life turns, how the same hands that raise a child can one day be the ones that discipline him. It's not revenge when you set boundaries, it's survival, and in my case, it was justice with peace on top. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, taking everything back, leaving him with nothing. I always tell them the same thing. I didn't take from him. I just stopped giving. Because that's the truth. I never wanted him to fail. I only wanted him to understand what it takes to stand. Now, my days are quiet. My heart doesn't race anymore when the phone rings. I live simply, eat simply, think simply. I sleep through the night without guilt or anger. The world feels calm again. And in that calm, I've found what money and family couldn't buy: peace that belongs to me and no one else. He stole from me thinking it was nothing, just a swipe, just a game, just another way to get what he wanted without earning it. But what he didn't understand is that every theft leaves a mark, and every betrayal plants a seed. For years, I let things slide. I forgave, ignored, and hoped he'd grow wiser with age. Instead, he grew comfortable. Too comfortable. He thought I was weak because I stayed silent. But silence isn't weakness. It's the warning before action. And when I finally acted, it wasn't out of anger. It was out of balance. The kind of balance that life demands when lines are crossed too far. Now, looking back, I realize I didn't ruin his life. He did. All I did was stop protecting him from the truth. I stopped being the safety net he kept falling back on. I stopped funding his mistakes and calling it love. I stopped pretending that blood should excuse betrayal. A son who steals from his father doesn't just take money. He takes trust, respect, and something deeper that never fully comes back. When that happens, a father doesn't owe more chances. He owes himself peace. I've heard people say that revenge doesn't heal. Maybe they're right. But what I did wasn't revenge. It was correction. I didn't break the law. I didn't shout or fight. I just used the same system he thought he could manipulate. I used time, patience, and paper, tools sharper than any weapon. When I signed those documents and reclaimed what was mine, it wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming dignity. The $2 million I took back wasn't just money. It was 40 years of sweat, sacrifice, and silence. It was the roof over his head when he was a child, the meals on his table when I skipped mine, the late nights I worked so he could go to school without worry. Every dollar had a story attached to it, stories he never cared to hear. So when he took that credit card and spent without thought, he didn't just steal funds. He stole chapters of my life. That's why I didn't feel guilt when I drained his accounts. I just took back my story. Sometimes I still think about him. I wonder if he's sitting somewhere now, realizing that money earned through deceit burns faster than money earned through effort. I hope he's finally learning what I tried to teach him long ago, that every shortcut in life leads to a wall, that every lie eventually collapses under its own weight, that no one is immune to consequence. I hope he's working now, saving now, learning humility one paycheck at a time, because the only way to rebuild is to start from zero and mean it this time. As for me, I've learned something too. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means letting go completely and wishing the other person learns without your help. I don't hate him. I don't even resent him anymore. He's my son, but he's also his own man, shaped by his choices. And my choice was to stop saving him from himself. That's not cruelty. That's love in its final, toughest form. The peace I live in now feels earned. I wake up every morning without bitterness. The air feels cleaner. The house feels warmer. The silence feels honest. I can finally look in the mirror and see a man who didn't let love blind him to justice. I gave everything a father could give, and when that wasn't enough, I took back what was rightfully mine. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. People ask me sometimes what I'd do if he came back tomorrow asking for help again. I always say the same thing. I'd open the door, offer him water, and let him sit. But not a single dollar more. Because mercy and foolishness are not the same thing. One rebuilds, the other destroys. So if there's one thing I'd tell any parent watching this, it's this. Love your children, but never let them mistake your love for weakness. The day you stop drawing lines is the day they stop respecting them. He stole my credit card once and thought he'd won. I took back $2 million and taught him what consequence feels like. He lost his empire. I found my peace. And if life ever brings him back to my door, I won't greet him with anger, just silence. Because silence is the sound of lessons learned too late.